Welcome to the tactical preview of Aston Villa versus Manchester City. In this series, what I try to do is predict Man City's lineup, offer some insight into the opponent, give a score prediction, and hopefully you leave the video a little bit more informed about the upcoming match in the Premier League at Villa Park, a ground that Rodri has not played at since 2022, and that ain't changing on Sunday either because he is still out injured. We know that Kusanov is also out injured. There are question marks about the fitness of Nico Gonzalez. All of that and more is going to be discussed in today's video. Manchester City against Villarreal did something that they haven't done in a hot minute. It was a return to the treble winning system, also known as the John Stones system. Of course, we should all know what this means by now. This is where John Stones, as that right centre-back, pushes up into the midfield to form that double pivot in the defensive midfield line. A box midfield is then formed, so you have four midfielders, usually overpowering the opponent's midfield three, or in Villarreal's case, the midfield two, because they played a 4-4-2. The back three is formed, the wingers do their thing out wide, and Savio had a fantastic game supported by the underlapping runs of Rico Lewis. So this is how City set up against Villarreal. We'll get into City in a bit more detail in a moment. Due to injuries, it may not be possible for City to play like this. Again, it's just very interesting to note that John Stones was available and Pep opted for the John Stones system, which ultimately won the treble. Was that just because of other players being injured? Who knows? We never know with Guardiola, do we? We'll get on to City, as I say, in more detail in a second. Let's briefly touch on Aston Villa, though, City's opponents, who started the season horrendously, not winning a game in 4, 5, 6 games, I believe, then went on a run of winning all of their games and recently lost against Go Ahead Eagles. However, that was a massively rotated side, so I'm not putting much stock into that performance. In fact, I've put such little stock into that performance that I've actually opted to show you what their lineup was against Spurs in the Premier League more recently. We can expect this to be a very similar lineup as against City, perhaps the only key difference being Marlon out and Watkins in. Outside of that, I'd expect this to be basically what Aston Villa's team will be. So what have Aston Villa been playing like this season? Unai Emery's not really done too much in the way of tactical ingenuity over the past few years. You can view that as a negative. You can view that as a positive, whichever one you want to do. For the purposes of this analysis, it makes it a lot clearer. We're basically playing against a side who are going to play a very similar way to how they played against us last season at Villa Park and the season before that. Mid-block, 4-4-2, for the most part, out of possession. When they build up, they do more so in this back four, supplanted by two midfielders. So including the goalkeeper, that is 7 players in their build-up. That invites a lot of pressure, which may be viewed as a bad thing, but the reality is that when you have key transitional threats like McGinn, Rodgers, Watkins, if he is on the pitch, who can get into those 1v1s, you're going to have a bad time if you commit too many bodies forwards to pressing Aston Villa's back four, which, as I say, turns into more of a build-up of 6, sometimes even 7 if the goalkeeper is also involved, and Aston Villa do absolutely involve the goalkeeper like a lot of modern sides. So that is something to look out for. Are City going to play in a similar-ish manner as against Arsenal, where right from the off, they backed off Arsenal and didn't really commit too much to a press? Or is City going to go in their more aggressive-oriented press, which does target the goalkeeper and the wingers targeting the widest defenders? We shall see. I'm not actually sure what's going to happen. I hope that City won't fall into that baited press. Key threats for Villa compared to City are, as I've noted, the transitional threats. It's also important to note that on ball, so when Villa get into like a more settled shape, their wingers often become very narrow, so quite often, so just pretend that Gusend is Watkins for now. Rodgers may start out wide, whether on the right or the left, but quite often, because he is more of an interior and inside player, he will actually drift more so to the interior. And same with McGinn, like if McGinn starts out wide, he will also tend to drift in narrowly. So quite often what you'll see is this blanket situation where actually the only width is being provided by Aston Villa's fullbacks, but Villa are absolutely fine to do this because they know that from a physicality and athletic perspective, they are going to dominate you in that centre of the pitch. So it doesn't really matter that they are that narrow when they have players like Onana, Kamara, McGinn, Rodgers, incredibly athletic, physical players. And we know that City has struggled with that a lot last season. So this is going to be a big challenge for City, certainly in that athletic POV of this match. It's going to be fascinating to see how City can try to cope with this Aston Villa side, given the injuries that City unfortunately have. So that's Aston Villa, essentially an incredibly tactically astute Premier League side, I'm going to say, from Unai Emery. They are still doing that very frustrating high line game where the high line is so high that they often catch players offside. We saw that a couple of seasons ago. City tried to exploit that, not getting much luck there. If you can bypass their high press, then you're obviously in behind. So it is one of those things where it is high risk, high reward. But quite often, Aston Villa do get that defensive line right. So it's on paper, it's something you can exploit. But in reality, it's not something that you can readily exploit at all. Whilst they are more passive in their pressing compared to, let's say, a side like Arsenal, they have still shown that they are able to commit a number of bodies to the forward press and really put the pressure onto the goalkeeper, in particular, at forcing the opponent into their weaker build-up side, essentially. So if your goalkeeper is left-footed, they're going to try to force the goalkeeper to play to the right side. So I'm going to predict that if Villa play like that, more intense in their pressing, then we are going to see a situation where they are going to try to force Donnarumma to pass to his left because Donnarumma is right-footed, so he's weaker passing to the left. So massive, massive burden from a build-up POV is going to be falling on the shoulders of Guardiola, who is probably our best build-up defender anyway, and is left-footed, so it's going to be on that left side. That's something to pay attention to as well. But the fact is that, unfortunately, Villa are more than capable of sitting back and being conservative and frustrating City. They are also more than capable of pushing up when we are trying to build up from play. So this is one of the worst teams that City could be playing, I would argue, in a vacuum, never mind with the context of Rodri being out and also Nico Gonzalez potentially being out. So I don't know if the concerned is the right word. No, I guess concerned is the right word. This is going to be a hard game, is what I'm trying to say. A big test for City, and City have been playing really good football recently. This is a massive challenge for them, particularly given that Villa have been on a bit of a winning run of late, minus that game against Go Ahead Eagles. So that's all on Aston Villa. Let's have a chat about Manchester City now and get your score predictions in the comment section as well. What do you think the score is going to be? I'm going to reveal mine at the end of the video. I haven't even decided what it's going to be yet. This was how we played against Villarreal. Let's just go back to the off ball for a moment, just for the sake of clarity. Some changes have to be made immediately, you would assume. I'd be staggered, given all the context I've just said about Aston Villa's midfield being incredibly physical and such. I'd be staggered if Lewis starts. Nico is a massive question mark. He went down against Villarreal, something in the foot, and Guardiola was very coy in his press conference. He said that we're going to basically find out in training today whether he starts. So this is a massive 50-50. We know that Rodri's out. We know Kusanov is out. There's a question mark about whether Nico Gonzalez is out. I'm going to predict him to not start, which lends itself to two potential options, which I'll get into in a moment. Let's just start with the back four, though. Let's get the attackers all the way, even though Haaland's definitely going to start. Let's just pop the attackers there for a moment. So Donnarumma, of course, is going to be in goal. That's the thing. Nunes has been absolutely fantastic at right back, and it's a non-starter anyway because Lewis shouldn't be starting at right back right now and for this game, certainly, and Kusanov ain't an option anyway, so surely Nunes is going to start there. John Stones, question mark there about whether he'll be starting. What I do think is going to happen at the back is that we will just go back to what we have seen for the vast majority of the season. I'm not going to predict Ait-Nouri to start because Ait-Nouri has not seen a minute of football since his injury. He wasn't even on the bench against Everton. He was on the bench against Villarreal, didn't see a minute of play. So I'm going to predict Nico O'Reilly to start. He did pick up a knock against Everton, but then he was straight on the bench against Villarreal. So I think he was just rested rather than he was absolutely out, because he was in fact on the bench, and Pep didn't really make any comments about O'Reilly in the press conference. So I'm going to punt for what's been City's most common defensive line so far this season, and it's certainly our most physically competent fullbacks also, and that could be key given how physically competent Aston Villa's nominal wide players are going to be. If I don't think Rodri is going to play, because I know Rodri's not going to play, and I don't think that Nico is going to play because I'm just going to guess that it's on the 50-50 side of he's not going to be starting, then that means we realistically have two options in the midfield as for the defensive midfield situation. Kovacic is, of course, an option there. I'm not a big fan of Kovacic doing that because I just touched on the massive transitional threat of Villa, and we know that Kovacic is liable to get cooked in those situations. He's also just come back from injury himself. He hasn't yet started a game yet this season for City. Is this the game to be starting him, even with the context of Rodri and Nico out? I don't think so. So even though, as I'm basically concluding here, I don't think we're going to play the Stones system because I don't think we can, because I've not predicted Stones to be in the back line. I am, based on all of that, going to predict Stones to play in midfield, off ball and on ball. Now this, I would say, is probably the biggest error I have made in my sort of YouTube analytical career sort of thing, because I was someone who was dead certain that you don't want to play John Stones off ball in midfield. I was just adamant that he couldn't do it because we saw against Aston Villa 2 seasons ago, he played in midfield and he looked lost. He was horrendous in that game. There was another one, I think it was against like a relegation side at the Etihad. He came on and played in midfield. He was absolutely horrendous. It might have been Norwich a few years ago. So I was basing it off that evidence. But then Stones played in midfield, off ball and on ball against Real Madrid. And I'm sorry, but if Akanji does not get injured in that game, which forced Stones to go into the back line, we win that game and we probably go through in that tie as well. I actually do not care. I seriously believe that would have been the case. Stones was exceptional in the midfield in that first half when he was allowed to play there off ball. So I'm going to predict Stones to do that. He looked really solid against Villarreal. Hopefully he can give us another fantastic performance against Villa. I believe that would be preferable to Kovacic starting, particularly given the fitness/injury concerns with Kovacic just returning. Stones had a full start against Villarreal. So I'm going to predict that. Foden was given a rest against Villarreal. He's been I would say, our second best player this season behind Haaland, arguably, certainly up there, regardless, whatever. He should surely come back into the side. I believe that we need him. Doku, let me just get Haaland into the team first of all. This midfield area is up for grabs, and I'll outline what I mean by that. I discussed earlier how one of Villa's strengths is that they're able to play narrow and they don't really care about the width when going forwards. However, that would appear to lend itself to, can City counter that by having key threats out wide? And I believe absolutely we can. Cash and Digne have their critics. I'm one of them. I don't know how... I don't believe that they are necessarily elite players. I do believe that they are a source of weakness for Villa. I think they are far more stable and strong in the centre rather than out wide. So I'm going to say that these are the two areas that City should be really focusing on, and I believe that if City are going to win this game, it will be out wide. This may lend itself to Marmoush starting, because if Villa are relying more on playing a transitional game, and certainly if they are playing a very high line, that would appear to lend itself to, well, you want a runner in behind. And that's what Omar Marmoush is, of course. And I might be tempted to start Marmoush. However, he has played 4 minutes since his return from injury, I believe, against Villarreal. I don't know if he's going to be ready for it. So I'm not going to predict him to start this game. Maybe it's more a game that you bring Marmoush on. So based on that, I am going to be starting Doku. I am going to be starting Savio, because everything I've just said about why Marmoush should start there, the only reason I'm not even going to contemplate it seriously is because of the fitness situation. That is also why Savio should start, because he's far more of a runner in behind rather than necessarily a ball-to-feet player. So I am going to go for Savio again. That will be a number of consecutive starts for Savio in big games as well. So I think that's fine. He's clearly got that trust and the okay from Pep. So Bob is going to be missing out again based on my predictions of what Pep's going to do. The last slot is interesting because if I'm predicting Savio there, and I'm predicting Foden, that means I therefore have to predict Foden in the middle. That's relevant because a lot of big games this season, away against Arsenal, Napoli in the Champions League, and I feel like there was another game in there, perhaps. City have often deployed Foden out wide at right wing, not really been trusted in the centre. The counter to that is he was trusted away against Monaco, so maybe he will be. So, but by definition, by my wingers, I am playing Foden in the centre. The last position, and this is the case for every single difficult game that City have had this season, and that includes away against Monaco. It also includes home against Napoli. It also includes away against Aston Villa. Bernardo Silva has started every, and we can pop Villarreal away as well. Bernardo Silva has started every single one of those games. And in his press conference today, Pep Guardiola rightly said that Aston Villa away is one of the hardest games in the Premier League for City. That would appear to indicate that Bernardo should start this game. And I would be tempted to predict Bernardo to start this game. Maybe I'll be able to talk my way out of it. However, Reinders has started, every single Premier League game, I feel like, and he was given a rest against Villarreal, didn't play at all. So I think for me, this is the biggest point of contention as for the predictions, because I'm so convinced that Foden's going to start, because Stones isn't a pure defensive midfielder, and to fair, Nico isn't either, but because he's potentially not playing Rodri or Nico, do you go for a more secure, stable midfield, which is going to be better off-ball in order to try to combat Villa, or do you go for the braver route and play for Reinders, who is more of an offensive threat? I've talked myself out of it. I am going to predict Bernardo to start, actually. Reinders, I felt, struggled against Everton. I felt that he struggled to help us build out from the back and progress up the pitch. And there is a world where Aston Villa are going to be very, very frustrating from a City perspective in terms of that pressing game. So I wonder, given the context of Rodri definitely being out and the context of Nico Gonzalez potentially being out, does it make sense to punt for a combination of Bernardo and Stones? That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be like a double pivot, because we haven't played with a nominal midfield two all season, but it does just provide Stones a bit more protection. Bernardo is better off-ball than Reinders, we have seen so far this season. Foden, I would contend, has actually been our best non-defensive player in the midfield. He's been better than Bernardo and Reinders, so there's no world in which Foden can get dropped for me outside of injury. Do you have a more stable / conservative midfield like this, and then trust in your wings? I think that's what I'm going to predict Pep Guardiola to do. Now, that might be a mental call to not predict Reinders to start. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm doing a Pep myself. But that's what I'm going to predict, just based on the precedent that Bernardo has started every single, on paper, tricky game. Away against Arsenal, away against Villarreal, away against Monaco, home against Napoli. Bernardo started every single one. There is also a world where Savio just doesn't start and Foden is, or even Bernardo's punted out to the wings and Reinders is played instead. Perhaps that is actually a more realistic starting 11, but given the context of Villa's fullbacks, I think it would be silly to not try to exploit that. You'll also notice I'm not predicting Cherki. This is not a game to be starting Cherki. I do not think that Guardiola would go for that. I think that he should be getting a start against Swansea, and then we'll take it from there. That is my tactical preview of the game. This is going to be a hard game for City. I'm going to predict another clean sheet, though. Not a high-scoring game, 1-0 to City, though. Big Don is going to get another clean sheet. He's been protected fantastically by the defence and the midfield this season. Let's hope that it continues, and whenever he is called into action, he's been able to come up with the saves also. So I'm predicting another clean sheet for City. Just the one goal in it, scored obviously by Erling Haaland. That's my prediction. Get yours in the comments section. Let me know if you enjoyed today's preview. Thank you so much for watching. There won't be a watch along, by the way, because it is my dad's birthday this weekend, so I will not be able to do a stream for a watch along. There will be a post-mortem after the match though, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. Shout out to all of my beautiful members, the highest tier ones being Tony, Spartacus, Silver Splits to Blue, Ethan Larios, Austin King, and Rowan.